He was 120 pounds. She was 26 pounds. He sat beside her and did not leave. On the fourth day, they understood that the size difference between them had been the point all along. They thought their Great Pyrenees had finally bonded with their daughter. He had been running an assessment since Tuesday and they were not going to like what he had found. Sandra and Victor Merriman had owned Atlas, a 4-year-old Great Pyrenees, since he was a puppy. He was a livestock guardian by breed, calm, territorial in the low-frequency way of dogs whose job historically was to think about the perimeter before they thought about themselves. He had been around their daughter Nora since Nora was 7 months old. He was not unfriendly to her. He was not close to her. He moved through the same house in the comfortable parallel way of two beings who respect each other's orbit without sharing it. Then on a Tuesday in November, when Nora was 22 months old, Alice sat down beside her on the living room rug and did not leave, not pressed against her, not touching her. Within arm's reach, at her left side, his large white body oriented in her direction, head at roughly her height when she sat. When Nora stood and walked to the kitchen, Atlas followed. When Nora settled on the playmat, Atlas lay down beside the mat. When Nora went to the bathroom with Sandra, Atlas waited outside the door. Sandra thought this was sweet. Victor thought this was the beginning of a bonding phase that sometimes happened in large dogs when children moved into the interactive age range. They took photographs. Sandra sent one to her mother, who replied that it was the most wholesome thing she had ever received by text message. They watched Atlas stay beside Nora for 36 hours, and decided this was simply who he was choosing to be now. If you stay for stories about what animals sense before we do, you are in the right place. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. On Wednesday evening, Sandra noticed that Nora seemed less interested in food than usual. Not dramatically. She ate half her dinner instead of most of it. She was slightly more tired by bath time. Neither of these things was alarming on its own. Atlas had not left her side since Tuesday morning. On Thursday, Nora's appetite was lower again. She was slightly warm to the touch. Not enough for a thermometer, just the warmth of a child whose system is working. She played normally, walked normally, showed no obvious distress. Sandra took her temperature. 37.8 Celsius. Marginal. The threshold for pediatric concern was 38. She was below it. Atlas was beside her when Sandra took the temperature. He watched the thermometer as if he understood its function. He looked at Sandra when she read the number. He lay back down beside Nora. Victor said on Thursday night, maybe we should call the clinic tomorrow if she's still off. Sandra agreed. She made a mental note. At 3:40 a.m. Friday morning, Atlas stood up from beside Nora's bed, where he had been sleeping on the floor, and walked to the master bedroom and pressed his nose against Victor's hand. Victor was a light sleeper. He woke. Atlas turned toward the hallway. Victor got up. In Nora's room, he found her awake, not crying. Her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright with the particular brightness of a fever that has crossed from marginal to real. He got the thermometer, 39.1 Celsius. He woke Sandra. Has your dog ever done something that made no sense until it was the only thing that made sense? Tell us in the comments. These stories deserve to be heard. At the pediatric urgent care, Dr. Marcus Ellery found what 3 days of subtle symptoms had been concealing. Nora had a significant ear infection with early signs of pressure behind the eardrum. The fever had spiked because the bacterial load had reached a threshold that her immune system could no longer manage quietly. 2 more days without treatment and they would have been looking at a possible perforation. Dr. Ellery asked how they had caught it at this stage given the lack of obvious symptoms. Victor described Atlas, the 3 days of proximity, the wake up at 3:40 a.m. Dr. Ellery was a physician who had worked in pediatrics for 22 years. He said, dogs detect infections through volatile organic compounds in breath and skin secretions. An ear infection in a toddler produces localized changes in the scent signature of the head and face area, compounds associated with bacterial activity, with immune response, with changes in tissue temperature. A large dog sitting beside a child at face height for 3 days was, in all likelihood, tracking the progression of a developing infection. He paused. The wake-up is the part I can't explain clinically. Dogs sometimes alert to changes in respiratory pattern or to temperature changes they detect through proximity. When the fever crossed a certain point, something changed that he could read before your thermometer told you to check. He looked at them. You have a very good dog. Every guardian deserves to be recognized, even the ones who chose a post no one assigned them and kept it for 72 hours without asking for anything in return. If these stories matter to you, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Nora was treated and recovered fully within a week. Atlas went back to his normal pattern of independent movement through the house after the antibiotics were complete. He stopped following her. He returned to his preferred spot near the back door, from which he can see the yard and the front hallway in the same sight line. Sandra watched him settle back into his usual position. On the afternoon of the day Nora's fever broke, he circled once and lay down with the solid finality of a dog who has completed something and is ready to rest. She sat down on the floor next to him and put her hand on his back. He didn't move. He exhaled once, long and slow, and closed his eyes. She sat with him for a while. She felt like someone who had almost missed something very important, being told gently that the important thing had been handled. She thought she should probably say thank you out loud. She did. The next story begins not with a dog, but with a baby monitor reading that looked normal, and a family who almost turned the monitor off the same night their dog was trying to tell them not to.